is painful. Most of the time people say, well, I'm very comfortable, or it's more convenient to do this, or the routine of I've always done it this way and I don't want to make a change. I'm not very popular in organizations because most of the time when I've been called in, it's because something horrible has happened. And now they say, we want to prevent horrible things from happening. What should we do? And I'm like, well, we're going to have to change some things. And that's the hardest thing for human beings to do, is to make a change because it's uncomfortable. So.
Great, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm Larry Boris with the Gun Club. Thank you for joining us today. We're very happy to have Mike Simpson from Arizona Tactical Adventures. If you're not familiar with this, I think you'll be very interested. I just learned about it a few weeks ago, and it's a totally different kind of experience that I think we're going to try out later in the year. So please welcome Mike Simpson.
So today I want to take the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about a concept known as reality-based training. Previously, a lot of people would just call it tactical training, training that was suited for either security officers, law enforcement, and military personnel. And the word tactical, a lot of times I tell people, it simply means knowledge, skills, tools, and resources to solve a problem. And most of the time when we think about tactical, it's going to be a critical incident, something dangerous that is happening that can have far-reaching consequences for my health, my livelihood, my safety. And unfortunately, a lot of times, organizations say, if you're a private citizen, you don't have the need for tactical training. You can call the police, we have security personnel, they'll handle things for you. And if you look at the news, we recognize a lot of times law enforcement really isn't there to protect or stop crime. They're there to respond, report, create statements. If they can stop an attack, they will, but in a lot of places they've abdicated that responsibility. I don't know who has the responsibility now, but a lot of times it falls to the person that's on the scene, and more than likely that is just going to be our everyday, quote, citizen. And so subsequently, you're going to hear me refer to reality-based training and tactical training, but they're the same thing. So when I first started my career, talk a little bit about my background first. I started off as a police officer in the Air Force. I had decided that I always had wanted to be in the military. My parents had told me, go to college, get a degree, make a lot of money. And I said, no, I've always wanted to be in the military since I was a young man. And of course, they told me that's a dead-end job. You'll never be able to make a career out of it. And so I decided I am going to join the military. And unfortunately, I decided to choose the Air Force because I knew there would be a lot of opportunities that I might not get in some of the other services. After about 4 years, I realized that unless I left to the private sector, I wouldn't have the opportunity to make the impact that I could. I was on a deployment overseas and I met some private contractors. Number one, they were getting paid about $30,000 a month to be over there doing the same work that I was. And I was making about $6,000 tax-free. And I thought to myself, this is the wrong equation. They're doing the same work, I'm doing the same work, but they're getting paid more lucratively. And they can turn down missions if they don't want to go on this mission. So then I moved into the private sector and started working for another company as a security consultant. In 2003, I decided to form my own company because I realized unless I owned the business, I couldn't make the changes that I wanted to, because the global war on terror had started about 2001 because of the September 11th attacks. And I realized that if I owned the company, I could dedicate myself towards making real world changes that would impact safety and have a greater impact on the mission at the time. My first client was actually the California State Capitol building when Governor Schwarzenegger was elected. They realized we need reality-based solutions. And at the time, here's how everything worked. An X-ray machine was purchased, so they would hire a company that provided X-ray detection training to find suspicious packages. A metal detector was purchased, and another company was hired to provide training for the metal detector. And then an active shooter training company was going to come in and provide training for everything. And they would say, we don't know anything about this technology. So it was all very disjointed training. And I realized that we need a solution that will integrate all of our responses in real time. And of course, the company I was working for at the time said, there's a lot of liability in that. We're not going to touch that because what if a terrorist attack happens? We'll be liable for the results. So their solution at the time was not to provide training because that way they absolved themselves of the legal liability.
And I couldn't live with that. And that's why I started my first company, was to actually be able to make a difference. A little bit down the road, people started asking, like, how do we win a gunfight in this situation? How do we render medical aid, not just the security consulting component? Now the question is about gunfights, active shooter response. People start asking, and of course, everybody will say, well, all we do is provide firearms training for our security officers. They go through their standard 3 days of armed security officer training, and they're responsible for anything else. So great, why aren't you doing advanced training? Well, it costs money, and we don't want to get into those type of questions that if they make the wrong decision, they're going to be held liable, will be held liable. So you'll notice there's constantly this trend about there is a real world threat. People recognize that they have to train for the fight, but then the next fight that comes up is going to be the legal battle, which can be scarier than the actual fight itself, because you can mitigate the actual fight. Nothing bad can happen by having the presence of a firearm, but now a legal battle ensues because of where you live or what you were carrying. They want to make an example out of you sometimes. I've been a business owner for 22 years now. This has been something that I enjoy doing because I get to learn, I get to control things in terms of how my company is run and the services that we apply. And most of my clients for the first 17 years were federal agencies, state agencies. I will tell you, I ended that relationship in 2020 because we all remember what was going on, and it was not a good time to be in business with the government. In the next 4 years from 2020 forward, were so dangerous as a business owner navigating those waters that I decided to change my company from a security consulting company to an adventure company. Because I realized two things very quickly. Number one, no one values education anymore. If I was holding an active shooter awareness program for teachers that was absolutely free, we might have 6 teachers attend. If I hold a Navy SEAL adventure, it sells out with 24 people. People don't value education anymore. And I recognized that my way of thinking and doing business in 2020 was going to land me in prison for trying to help people. Straight up. I had to have a conversation with a federal agent who said, we are not interested in prosecuting these cartel members. Another agency wants to arrest you. They're setting up a sting. I said, let them go. I said, great, thanks for the heads up. Had I not had that relationship, I would have been arrested, lost my livelihood. And so I decided I can't take the risk of training people anymore because I have to go into the tourism business. So I made a very conscious decision. Everybody says, why are you in the adventure business now? Well, because I have to work 4 times less and I can make 4 times as much money and I stay under the radar. But we're going to talk about how reality-based training can supplant traditional skill sets and resources that might not be available to you. I've been a husband now for 15 years, and it's probably one of the most challenging jobs that I have because I can't just end the relationship like I did with the other clients. And I love my wife very much, and I'm now a father for 5 years. And being a father to a 5-year-old who has a deep interest in what I do, I'm homeschooling my son. And so every day, as part of dad's school, he has his Army school component where I teach him things about my job, about how to learn. And sometimes when we're out in public, he says the most inappropriate things like, frag out, I'm going to shoot these bad guys in the face, which I have to kind of go like, these aren't threats. They're not enemy combatants. Let's not play that here. So, but I think right now, as I've told my wife, this is my favorite job, and it is the most important job that I currently have as being a father. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to learn about. So we're going to talk a little bit about reality-based training, why it's different from traditional firearms or self-defense models, why law enforcement and the military automatically uses that model, but I would be surprised to discover that model in almost any other self-defense school or firearms related schools. We'll talk a little bit about tactics. This is going to be where you're going to get the most value today because I'm going to bring up some ideas, simply little things that you can do when you're training with your firearms or you're thinking about self-defense things that will change your mindset, because I talk a lot about mindset, fitness, and tactics. And most of the time, the hardest thing to do is change the mindset. Everything else is self-important. People say, I understand why it's important to eat right, exercise, and get enough sleep. But your mindset is going to be your most valuable tool. We're going to discuss the tools, equipment, and technology, because nothing gets people out to the range like buying a new firearm or getting a new piece of gear. It motivates everybody. I got something new. I got to go and learn to use it or justify the purchase so that it can go sit in the safe for another year until I get my next piece of technology. And then talk a little bit about some of the applications to real world scenarios. All of my dangerous situations, except for a handful, have happened to me as I've been a citizen, just minding my own business. Most of the time when I was a police officer in the Air Force, there were a few really interesting events that had happened, but at the time I didn't realize how unprepared I was for those, and I just muddled my way through there. And I'm going, wow, that could have ended up completely differently. I'm glad I didn't know what I know then, because it would have changed and I probably would have been in trouble. But one of the things I will mention is all of the images that you're going to see today are my clients. Not a single picture that I'm using is going to be special operations or military personnel. Everybody, gentleman at the front right there, the very first one you see, that's Brad. He's a commercial truck driver for a living. Brad should have joined special forces as a young man, but instead he's a truck driver. Joey, the next person behind him, is a neurosurgeon. He supports neurotechnology. None of these individuals have any military or law enforcement background. Most of them have trained with me from anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And so they have gone from simply situational awareness of understanding about firearms to, I want to pursue the highest level of training, special operations level. Now, obviously, those individuals, those gentlemen, have very different backgrounds, but they have a common interest in training to be a warrior, to protect themselves, their family, their community, or their country. And even though they couldn't serve in the military or made a choice not to serve, they recognize the responsibility to protect themselves and their immediate family relies upon them. And if they're ever called upon to protect their country as a civilian, they've built some of those skill sets that might be required. And more importantly, they've learned how to teach others the same thing. So there's some fun pictures in here. So let's talk a little bit about some of the objectives of tactical training. Why would you subject yourself to a new way of thinking and a new mindset? The basic reason is this: you're going to have a high pressure or a dangerous situation someday, whether that's in your personal life or the protection of others. And this type of training gives you the opportunity to build an inoculation to stress and to chaos. It allows you the ability to communicate rapidly in dangerous situations, make decisions, and help others. That's it. This is why law enforcement and the military uses reality-based or tactical training, is to prepare people for their worst day, whatever that might be. A lot of times the skill sets, and we're going to talk about the way that training is built out, it's designed to run things repeatedly so that the skills are almost second nature and they can become effective and rapid as needed. And the primary goal is to complete the objective, whatever that might be. A lot of times when I look at an organization, I tell people there should be 4 primary goals. Number 1, prevent intentional and unintentional harm from happening. We want to prevent people from being attacked or being accidentally injured. Prevent loss or damage to assets. We have things. Prevent damaging or embarrassing situations. Our reputations are very important. And lastly, whatever way we choose to do that, it should enhance the environment through effective customer service, because you can prevent a lot of bad things from happening. That was the primary objective of the TSA when it was created for airline security, but they created a lot of damaging, embarrassing situations because they forgot our primary clients, our guests, are American citizens who are law-abiding citizens, but were treated like criminals. And so even though they have 3 very important missions, the 4th one, they're failing at horribly. That's part of that mindset. We're trying to keep you safe, so we're going to demean you. Cool. Thank you very much. And if at any time you have any questions or any comments, I discuss anything, or you just don't like what I'm saying, please feel free to tell me and just raise your hand and we can discuss it. Because I know. So how did this happen? Why did these tactics change and evolve? Well, most of it is going to be from combat applications and law enforcement. Specifically, since the global war on terror started in 2001, there has been a rapid acceleration of both technology and tactics. The scariest thing that I find is I train with young Marines from time to time, and they come through and they are still being taught things that were developed during the 1970s and 1980s. And when I ask them, why have you not adapted to these new techniques and technologies? And they say, well, number one, they tell us this is the way that the Marine Corps has done it for 100 years. So this is the way we're going to do it because it works. Oh, okay. And number two, we don't have the money. And I say, I would beg to disagree. It's a mindset shift. Number one, the money exists. They just choose not to spend it on the technology for those individuals. So a lot of the information that I have comes from being a security consultant and a trainer that has worked in 19 different countries around the world. And anytime I find a better way of doing things, I research that, why that change was made. And I find most of the time, it's a historical precedent. Something happened that changes the way that we think. And if we don't adapt to new threats and new technology, and we say, well, it's been good enough for us in the past, we become either obsolete or we become victims of our own bias because it hasn't happened to me. So a lot of this is going to be dependent on law enforcement incidents or military incidents overseas. Best example of this is I was working with one of our guest instructors who's former SEAL Team 6. I'll give him a quick plug. His name is Daniel Corbett. He's written a book called American Mercenary. If you've ever seen the movie with Tom Hanks, Captain Phillips, he was one of the SEAL snipers that took that shot. We're working in our shoot house and I asked him, hey, it's my understanding that SEAL Team 6, whenever they're working in the shoot houses, only works ocular cranial cavity shots. There's no more upper thoracic cavity shots. True or false? That's because of suicide vests and body armor. He said false. It was an incident in which they were attacking a target building, they had a canine on site. They released the canine. The canine bit a subject. Subject pulled the canine up as the team members were making entry into the room. They discharged their weapon according to muscle memory. Their point of aim, point of impact was upper thoracic cavity. They shot and they killed their own team member in the form of a canine. Because of that incident, they changed their methodology to now all ocular cranial cavity. So that does away with whether there's a suicide vest or body armor or anything else. So they went to a much more precise methodology of shooting. We call that proactive shooting. Now, subsequently, a lot of times when I talk about law enforcement and we're clearing rooms and we say, hey, we're going to target the ocular cranial cavity, say we're not allowed to do that because this would be considered an execution shot. No, it's a stopping shot. We have two types of organs in our body. We have timers and we have switches. If I need to stop a threat instantaneously, I need to make a conscious decision to target a switch. And so again, a lot of this is going to be incident driven, and then the politicians get their opportunity to make decisions that impact your safety and your livelihood. And I'm always going to go based on reality, not what somebody's feelings or emotions are going to be about where that shot was taken. So let's talk about some of the core principles, which we're going to talk. Training principles. Number one, scenario-based drills. I'm going to call for a volunteer to come up so I can show the difference. If you've had any opportunity to work at a live fire range or go through a live fire class, I'm going to run a drill similar to what you might encounter on a live fire. And then I'm going to show you a slight variation to that drill that makes a major shift in mindset, and then discuss how continuous improvement is needed so that way you continue to evolve and learn. So let's look at our traditional versus reality-based training model. I've been to a lot of firearms training courses that were provided by the military or private companies. I will always take a training class, probably about once a month, once every other month. During the busy season, for me, November through April, because the weather's good, everybody's in town, they want to do training. I might only get one class per month with somebody else. During the summer, I take other courses, and this is what I find. There's typically some kind of lecture where we're going to discuss or talk about the topic. We'll have a discussion how it relates to your way of doing business, the way you protect yourself. A lot of times there's demonstrations. This is the way that you should do this because it's the most effective. I will tell you, I usually teach 3 ways. What I consider the safest for new shooters, the most efficient for advanced shooters, and then an intermediate skill level that takes safety and efficiency and combines it. And people ask me, what do you use under stress? I use the intermediate one because I recognize that I'm human and I can make mistakes. So I want that safety to still be there, but I still want efficiency. So I typically don't teach the way. I will always try to teach 3 different techniques and tell people, you make the choice. You're going to have to be in that situation. And a lot of times this is where people start saying, well, I was taught. Yes, cool. Go use what you think is most efficient. Then the students will participate in what's called skill building drills. You have to improve your ability to solve that problem. And then there might be some force on target training. You shoot some targets, there's an after action discussion, and everybody goes home, says, wow, I learned a lot at that program. But the reality is this, your force that you applied that force against was to a paper target. I guarantee you will never be attacked by a paper target. If you're using the reality-based training model, you now have to include the opportunity for a role player, because the role player, the enemy combatant or non-combatant, gets a vote. The environment gets a vote. Quick show of hands. Who regularly trains with their firearm with the lights off and just a flashlight? So show of hands. If you regularly, most of the time when you go to the shooting range and you use your weapon, is it mostly at night or during the daytime?
Daytime.
Daytime, right? The majority of people go to well-illuminated ranges. What they discover when they train with me is 60% of the time we turn the lights down. They go, it's hard to see the targets. I don't have a handheld flashlight. I jokingly tell everyone, if you carry a firearm, you should carry a handheld flashlight. If you don't carry a firearm, you should carry a handheld flashlight. I have solved more problems with my flashlight than I ever have with my firearm. And people say, yeah, but how do I train at the range when the lights are on with my flashlight? Simply put, you start the drill with your flashlight out. But I don't really need it, correct. But you're gonna build the muscle memory of holding a flashlight and how to solve it. In case you're wondering what type of flashlight you should get, it needs to have a push button, nothing else on the back, one push button that works when you press it and let go. You don't want it to change functions. If you have to push it multiple times to get to a certain function, that is not a good flashlight. At a minimum, you want to have 500 lumens on that, so that way you can threat identify a threat out to 25 yards. Favorite story I like to tell about this, I was loading a vehicle about 5 o'clock in the morning near 23rd Avenue and Northern. And if you know anything about 23rd Avenue and Northern, there's a 24-hour meth clinic that was built there. So I got a lot of real world experience. I had a nice apartment right next to my office building. There was an abandoned golf course that had shut down and a meth clinic moved in. And then LA Fitness was built over there. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, I thought I heard somebody move behind me, and I immediately just put my flashlight out and created space between myself and the subject that was approaching me. I didn't even say anything, but the subject suddenly turned, ran headfirst into a wall, bounced off the wall, jumped up, and kept running. And I thought to myself, that would have been an interesting conversation to have with that individual, but I'm glad I didn't have to.
Yeah.
So again, a lot of times the perception of a flashlight, especially something related to law enforcement, is behind the flashlight, there's also a gun, because that's been that individual's experiences. That type of flashlight means there is a gun present. There was a gun present, but I didn't ever have to go to my firearm. So again, force on role player, in the image, you can see we have an individual coming out of a corner using a blank firing weapon. We have one of our students that is now saying, wow, AK-47s are really loud inside of buildings. I didn't realize how loud guns were when they're being fired at me, because all the energy is coming forward. And so we have to start off by responding to the human element. The environment gets a vote, it's dark, and the enemy gets a vote. And if we're not used to adjusting our response or our mindset to what's happening there, we're going to have significant problems in the decisions we're going to make. So initially on a force on role player, you're not getting hit. Nothing bad is happening to you because you're going to win that gunfight. We need to show you that the tactics work. Then we go to force on force. In force on force training, the role player is shooting back projectiles. Some of the technology that we're going to discuss on the lowest level is going to be things like airsoft, simunition, UTM, Ultimate Training Munitions. My new favorite platform is what's called Unit Solutions. It's the most effective and cost-effective training system that's on the market. Just came out about a year and a half ago. Laser-based trainers. But there has to be some kind of pain compliance. If you don't feel pain, your brain doesn't register a mistake. Some really interesting things coming out that just came out that are laser-based, where they're using electrical stimulation to paralyze limbs. I don't know if I'll get those within the next year or so. My brother, who's a bomb tech who just retired from the military, is trained with them, and he says they hurt beyond belief because they actually paralyze your limbs and feel like a gunshot wound. I've only had a bullet fragment hit me, not a direct round, but that didn't hurt, but the tourniquet application hurt. And so I'm like, gunshot wounds don't necessarily have to hurt, but he's saying this electrical stimulation that's coming out soon is some next level pain. So I'm like, oh, good. Yay. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to integrate scenario training where you don't know what's about to happen. Because most of the time when you do a skill builder, hey, we're going to tell you, you're going to see a threat, you're going to engage the threat. But on this scenario, we just know you're in your house and something's about to happen. So I'm going to use some terms that I'm just going to introduce that idea. Force continuum is a series of actions that flow into each other. And ideally, we want to start at the lowest level of force to end or resolve a scenario. So when I talk about force continuum, I want you to think about a toolbox. If you had to reach into that toolbox and grab the tool, it's the appropriate tool to resolve that scenario. Rules of combat. If you're on the range or you're doing any type of self-defense training, your drills should always incorporate the 5 rules. Secure. Maintain 360-degree situational awareness of what's going on in your space. Movement. And this is the thing most traditional ranges don't allow you to do. They have you stand perfectly still. If you're standing still, you're what's called on the X. Ever watch the old Wile E. Coyote cartoons? You know you don't want to stand on the X because that's where the boulder's going to land. Communication. I personally think communication is the most important rule of combat, not just with your partner or your team, but with the subject. One of the personal beliefs that I have, the reason I've never had to shoot anybody is because prior to having to pull the trigger, people made a better life choice because they knew they were about to be shot. You have to know how to shoot. So shooting is a component of combat. And then the ability to sustain, take actions that allow you to continue the fight. And then you need to understand that in any drill that you're building, there's actually 4 fights that you're preparing for. The first is the fight or the gunfight. The second is the legal battle that you're going to have to go through. The third is the mental struggle of what you're going to have to survive with the decisions that you've made. And then recognize that you are a part and a component of a larger war called spiritual warfare. You can start off in the service of righteousness as a warrior. And by being in the environment toxic and dealing with the equivalent of human garbage every day, you can lose who you are and go into the service of darkness. And I've met too many individuals who have lost the mental struggle because of spiritual warfare that they don't recognize they're not the same person when they started off on this path. And I've tried to tell them it's time to leave. It's time to leave. Because very quickly the legal battle will overtake you, and now you're on the wrong side of everything you were trying to defend. So let's look at what's necessary to understand force continuum. I'm going to start at the lowest level, which is presence. And presence is the ability to stop or deter an attack based on the perceived ability that your attacker believes you have. For presence to be effective, you need to be perceived as being both professional and competent. It's in the way that you stand, the way you present yourself, the way that you speak to a subject. From there, you have to have the ability to use strong verbal commands to dissuade or stop a subject. Again, I like to think that one of the main reasons that I haven't had to shoot a subject is because of the verbal commands that I've given them. Most of the people that I've arrested, before they start putting up a resistance, realize this fight is not going to go the way that I want. So they either flee or they submit. There's a wonderful book, if you have not had the opportunity to read it, it's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. It is required reading for almost all federal agents, that if you're in the FBI. It was on Oprah's book list for the longest time. If you're a woman and you're interested in being able to decipher survival signals, all right? I tell everybody, like, hey, the Gift of Fear is the place to start because it allows you to understand those internal signals and subsequently understand how to use verbal commands. Then escort techniques. How do we move a subject from a sensitive area to a less sensitive area? And what we're going to discover when we make contact with that subject, when I put a hand on a person, they're either going to be a yes, a maybe, or a no person. If they're a no person, they're going to be a passive, defensive, or aggressive resistor. And simply by touching somebody on their right elbow, I'm going to be able to tell a lot about their body language and what resource I'm going to need to solve this problem. So escort techniques are very valuable. A lot of times I'm in a restaurant or a cafe and a manager says, we can't do anything about this homeless person because they refuse to leave and I'm not going to do anything. And I ask them, would you like for me to escort them out? And they're like, oh, we don't want you to get in trouble. We don't want any problems. I'm like, we have a problem. But people are very afraid of that legal battle. And so escort techniques are a very valuable thing to practice. Then we get into low impact strike techniques. These are going to be strikes that don't target the central nervous system, the head, or the spinal column. As the father of a 5-year-old boy, I have to use low impact strike techniques all the time. It was posterior. And he looks at me and goes, that doesn't hurt. I'm like, well, it really can't. He's tough. But see, we have to draw a line because now if we go above that line and we use some of these other techniques improperly, we can cause serious bodily injury or death. We start looking at less lethal technology, things like sprays, tasers, stun guns, or beanbag rounds from shotguns. I will tell you this, I'm not a big fan of sprays. The subjects out there that are bad guys know how to defeat those sprays and they are not combat effective against drug addicts. So again, if you are carrying a pepper spray and relying on that to save you, it doesn't work that effectively. Same thing with drive stun guns. If they have a drive stun application, unless you hold it onto a subject in their neck or their groin for 30 seconds, you are in a 30-second fight with an individual who every time you shock them just gets angrier. As part of some of my self-defense training, I will give a stun gun to a lady and say, we're going to fight for 30 seconds. She goes, I don't want to fight. Like, well, that's what you carry in your purse. Yeah, but in the movies, you zap somebody, they fall straight down. Like, I wish. Then we get into high impact strike techniques. Now we are using closed fists. We are using feet. We are using batons, and we can target the central nervous system. We are punching somebody in the face. We can cause serious bodily injury or death with high impact strike techniques because the last thing left to us is going to be deadly force, which is anything that will cause serious bodily injury or death. But most of the time when people go to a shooting range, the only tool that we're working with is deadly force. Everything is a nail. So subsequently, the only tool we draw from our toolbox is a hammer. And that is what we now say, I'm going to use out in public. So I'm going to give you a quick demonstration, a comparison of the training using some of these concepts. So is there anybody who'd like to volunteer to come up? And I promise I'm not doing anything to trick you. I'm trying to do an illustration for the purposes of showing the difference between the mindset of traditional versus reality-based training. If you've been to a shooting range and you can follow instructions, that's all I need you to do. Anyone? Great. What's your name, sir?
Jim.
Jim. Thank you so much, sir. So Jim, I'm Mike, and again, I'm not going to do anything to try to embarrass you, all right? So if you can just follow my instructions. What we're going to do is I'm going to have Jim stand right over here, and we're going to pretend that that is the target on a traditional shooting range. And that could be, you know, at a distance of 5 yards or 10 yards, whatever distance that would be. It's close to about the actual approximation. So Jim, when you go to the range, do you get a chance to work from a holster or? No, okay, so in this situation, we're gonna pretend that you're part of a class in which you don't have a holster and you might be in whatever appropriate position. Are you familiar with, let's say, the low ready or on target? So in the low ready, if you wanna just point your weapon at this space here, even though this is a very tall subject, it's a very tall subject. I would not be using a handgun against this subject, all right? So you're gonna be in the low range. Low ready position. So I'm gonna typically say, shooter stand by, shooter on the command of fire. I want you to fire 2 shots. Shooter stand by, fire. Jim, why aren't you aiming at the target?
I am.
Where's the target, Jim?
You said aim lower.
Yes, that's the low ready, but when it's time to fire, where are you gonna shoot?
Oh, okay.
All right. I want to make sure that you weren't seeing something that I wasn't seeing there. All right, sir. All right, so on the command of fire, shooter, stand by, fire. Threat down, shooter from the low ready, stand by, fire. Perfect. Thank you very much. How many of you have been to the shooting range or gone to a class and have performed a similar drill? Maybe yes? Okay, very good. Thank you, Jim. That's all I need. That's all I need. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that is a very common experience for us in a traditional range setting. There's an expectation that we're going to use techniques that are going to be safe, and we're going to be able to build a skill. The skill specifically for this drill is to be able to move your weapon from the low ready, place the weapon on target, discharge the weapon twice, we call that a controlled pair, and then afterwards we would evaluate the target and then choose where the appropriate area of impact would have been. Out of curiosity, Jim, where were you targeting on that target?
Middle square.
Okay, so the upper thoracic cavity. What organs, to the best of your knowledge, exist in that area?
Lungs.
Okay, lungs.
Heart.
Heart, okay, great. So we're acknowledging that the reason we're targeting those areas is because there are vital organs that, if penetrated by metal, might cause a subject to stop. There's also a spinal column there as well. Great, yeah. So what we need to understand is that anytime that we go to the range or we work through a drill, what we do in practice, we're building a skill set, and we're hoping that that skill set will be able to be of use or service to us in reality. So now, in reality-based training, what we're going to do is we're going to start off by, how would you stand in that situation before I even had a firearm? So the first thing that I would teach is, we're going to start in what's called the ready position. My feet are going to be shoulder width apart. My hands are going to be above my waist, because I want to present myself as a neutral threat. I don't want to be aggressive. I don't want to be passive. Or I don't want to be perceived as prey. So a lot of times in law enforcement, this will be called the field interview stance. Do conversation with the first thing before I even touch my firearm. So we'll, hey, dude. So notice, I'm not interacting with my, I'm not doing anything because I want to train my to de-escalate that situation. So I might say subject. So now I have to envision what this subject is doing. Hey, for my safety, sir, could you hold up? The number one thing I experience when I stop by gas stations is homeless or indigent individuals that start approaching. I move to the ready. For safety, can I have you hold up right there? Time to, yeah. Can you help me? Or hands go into their pockets. For my safety, I need your hands. Because now what we're trying to do is we're trying to control the subject. I'm trying to give them every opportunity to make life. is because I have conversations with my targets. Now, I'm gonna shout a little bit. I'm not gonna use my full voice because people will come running. So on a traditional range, if I was out at the shooting range, and I set my target up, hey man, how's it going? For my safety, can I have you hold up right there? I might shout loudly, stop, do it now, right? That's about half strength right there. I want that individual to be shocked into compliance because I want to de-escalate this. A lot of times I'll have individuals freeze or do exactly what I tell them. Get on the floor. Put your hands up. Let me see you. Let me see you. Hands. Show me your hands. Okay. Then the question always comes, are you a cop? You never have to answer that question. That's for them to perceive. You don't say yes, you don't say no. Once you start telling them what you want them to do, you're a free citizen having a conversation with another free citizen. They can choose to literally turn around and walk away. You're not detaining them. Stop. Let me see your hands. Do it now. I've had individuals start backing away. Are you a cop? Are you a cop? Are you a cop? And then they run. Cool, man. It's not my responsibility to stop you. It's my responsibility to protect myself, my wife, and my son. So be mindful, their perception in their mind is going to start being created. If your presence is not that of being able to back up that threat, presence, those verbal commands don't work. Conversely, if you're very timid and go, hey, excuse me, sir, could you show me your hands? I don't want to get into a fight. They don't care because there is no presence. They don't believe that you have the ability to stop their attack. Now,